Hi, I'm Bill Warren. I'm a building science consultant, and I specialize in looking at excess humidity and indoor air quality problems that take place inside a building. So I spend a lot of time looking at problematic airflows in and out of the building and through the building. And what I'm going to be focusing on in a series of these videos that I'm going to be doing is this right here. So we're at the end of October, and we're headed into our third spike of coronavirus infections in the United States and the world as well. This was well predicted because as we go into the fall, people are going more into buildings. And the data that contact tracing has led to has shown us that, for example, in one study of 20,000 cases that showed up on the 538 website, that only 6% could be attributed to outdoor exposures. And the rest of that is coming in the indoor environment. So you would think by now that we'd have a fairly good handle on what is it that's causing so many problems inside of buildings. But when I go look at it, what I see is this common repeated phrase of the problems are happening in poorly ventilated buildings. And that doesn't tell me much to go on to. So I've had to dig deeper into the data. And this is what I found out. That term most likely comes from one specific case that happened in January in China in a restaurant. And it resulted in some research, a couple of different papers, that it's called the Evidence for Probable Aerosol Transmission of SARS-CoV-2 in a Poorly Ventilated Restaurant. And it seems to me that that term has just stuck, and that's as far as we've gone with it. But I know from my experiences that I can think of situations that have nothing to do with ventilation that can cause significant problems in a building without anything to do with ventilation. So why don't I show you an example of a couple of things right now. Well, before we go on, let me explain my concern with the term poorly ventilated. Ventilation in the codes in the design world refers to outdoor air being brought in or indoor air being brought out either passively by having operable windows or mechanically by having exhaust fan systems, outdoor air duct bringing in outdoor air on an air handling unit, or a specialized ventilation unit that would be something like an energy recovery ventilator or something like that. The issue that I have is that if you tell a design professional that the problem is poor ventilation, they're going to think specifically it has to do with those types of systems. I'm going to show you that you can have poor COVID air with good outdoor air ventilation. And that's my point. Let's go on. So I'm going to show you now a standard performance feature of my house, and it has to do with how we heat and cool the rooms. So I have a heat pump, and that means I have a air system that moves air through the air handling unit, and it delivers it out to the supply air vents. And this warm air that's coming out of here is going to be heated or cooled, and it's going to condition this room. And then it has to go back and get reheated and recooled. And it does that, in my case, having the air go from inside the room, out through the bedroom doorway, and down the corridor until it comes to a central ceiling return right up here. The thermostat is going to control when the air is going to be coming out of the supply and going back to the return. And that has to do with how you set the switch on the thermostat. And so I'm going to put it in the on mode here, and now we're going to watch this return air duct up here to see when that paper pulls up, and then we'll know the system has engaged. So again, we're returning air from the room, from all of the rooms, coming back to the central return. And there we have it. So that just happened, and then at the same time, you can now see that I get this centered, that those blue tapes are moving. So air is coming from the supply to the return. Okay, item 2 is that when air starts discharging from that supply air vent, it has to move the air that's in front of it out the room and through the doorway and back to the return, because this air is being pulled and that's coming. After a short period of time, this air will start mixing with the room, but the first thing it's going to do is just push the air in front of it out the doorway. And here's the big issue with this, is if nothing else had happened in this room and we have an isolation bedroom here, then we have some level of contaminated air that will now be pushed right back into the main space of the house through the door. And that's something we do not want to do. We do not want to return air from a COVID isolation bedroom back to the main body of the house where it could possibly make other people in the house get infected. So I've shown you how this works. Supply air comes into the room, starts at the first, when it first comes on, if it's in the auto position, pushes this air, and then the return pulls this amount of air right at you. If you were to walk in the room at that moment, you'd get a maximum dose. If after the fan has been running just a few seconds or so, it's going to start mixing with the air, and then the dose would reduce. If you're running the fan continuously, then you're going to get a dose which is going to be determined by the exhalations of the person, quiet, less, coughing fit, a lot more. And another thing about this is that all this air now has to funnel down to this door opening, 30 inches by 6 feet 8. And so that all has to come here and focus the dose. And I'm going to talk about that when I talk later about the hallway outside. Well, I thought I wanted to demonstrate now how this airflow is going to work by using my trusty smoke pencil. And this is a real neat little device here. It's got lights on it and makes a nice little puff of smoke, but it's a little hard to see in the scale that I wanted to do on this video. So I thought I'd go with something a little more dramatic. And this is why I have the glove on. So instead, we'll use some dry ice and make a little beverage. Now that's what I call sweet. Okay, so sorry. So what we'll see here is, let's see if we can do it this way and see how it works. So the air is flowing that way. You can't really see it. So we're going to constrict the airflow just a little bit. And at some point we should start to see, yep, there we go. All of our smoke is wanting to leave. And why? It's because of this air movement from the supply to the return. And that's the airflow you would get at this level of door open. We'll get a lot less if the door is all the way closed. We'll only have to go down to the bottom, but you can't see that. So I won't bother to show you that now. And then we get a little bit more. As the door opens, it picks up. You can see that. You get a little gust right there. And then we have this situation right here. So there's your airflow. It's going to spill now, but it's still generally going to be to the outside. I should hold it up higher so you can see it better. So you see, this is what you got. Now, you walk into the room. This fifth system turns on. This is what you're doing. Think of this as whatever COVID contaminated air that we have not been able to remove in the room, you're going to be in your direct breathing pathway. Not a good idea. And one last thing. This situation, this setup, has nothing to do with ventilation, which is the moving of air out of the building by exhaust or bringing it in by some sort of outdoor makeup through an energy recovery ventilator or outdoor air duct or so forth. This is regular design, and it results in bad air, contaminated airflow from a COVID-19 isolation bedroom back to the main hall, and puts the person who's come to the door at risk. More risk, less risk, all risk. Well, the solution to this problem is straightforward. Air coming out of the supply air register in a COVID isolation bedroom. Let's close the vent and tape it off. We've had a tape job, but that'll do for right now. You get the idea. So, in any COVID isolation bedroom, we want to tape off the supply air registers, every one of them. And if we have a air return in the room, we tape that as well. Now this is going to make this room harder to keep warm and cool, but we'll solve those problems in a later video. But in this situation, the most paramount thing we need to do is not have COVID-19 air going back to the main body of the house. Now I'd like to show you an example that incorporates good ventilation. And a good ventilation in this case is again, we're going to use the COVID isolation bedroom. And the good advice comes from the Center for Disease Control, the US EPA, Energy Star, and the Professional Society of Heating and Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Engineers, ASHRAE. And they all have directives and recommendations for opening windows in isolation bedrooms. And the concept of there is that air will come into the space, create air changes, and by doing so, some of that air is going to be going back out the window, and so you'll have this circular pattern of air mixing and diluting and removing COVID contaminated air by this process. But the problem is that oftentimes whenever more air is coming in this window than coming out, that means it is going to go other places in the house. And that's what we don't want. We do not want to return COVID contaminated air from an isolation room back into the main body of the house, through the doorway and through the hallway and to the rest of it. So let's see what this is all about. Well, it's about low 50s outside, 70 in here. We have a temperature difference, and when we have that happening, we have the warm air in the house becoming more buoyant and trying to rise up, and it's trying to find its way out and leak through the top of the house. And as it does so, we have a rule that says for a cubic foot of air that comes into the house, one must go out someplace else to balance the equation. So I have air right now that's trying to leave my house moderately slow because it's only 50 degrees, it's not 20 degrees. More air will be leaving at 20 degrees than at 50. And we also have another condition which says air tends to take the path of least resistance. So in this situation, with all the doors and exterior doors and windows closed, the air is coming in and it's trying to get in all the little cracks down at the floor wall connection and so forth. But if we go and open a window deliberately, now we've created a path of least resistance, which is a very easy place for the air to come in. And so a lot of our makeup air, the infiltration air, is going to be coming from outside and trying to find and moving towards those exit spots where it's going to be exfiltrating up into the attic and to the outside at the top part of the house. So what does this all mean? Let's take a look. So good recommendation to open the window. Now the first thing is the weather gets colder. Opening a window in a room that you have someone that may be quite sick or even not sick, it's going to be fairly uncomfortable and increasingly uncomfortable because you're going to get air coming in. Cold air. All right. So we can see that right now. Let's use our dry ice again. And this is about a 20-degree temperature difference. So all of our air is coming in, and none of it's going out in this situation here. So whatever this airflow is, and this airflow is a couple of feet per minute by this opening, all of this air right now is going back to the main body of the house. Let me go close the door and see if that slows down. Yeah, so I closed the door, and the airflow is, you can visually see that it's slowed down. It's still coming in, but it's being stopped because the door is closed, so it doesn't have that easy path of least resistance to go through. So the only way we can make this kind of a system work is we have to close the door, weather strip the door, and keep it closed all the time. That's just not possible if we're dealing with an isolation person here. We need to come in, we need to socialize, we need to clean up, we need to do things. So this is not a good strategy. Open windows in an isolation bedroom is not done in any type of infectious disease control thing in a hospital or any type of containment when we're dealing with asbestos or lead. We always keep the space, no airflow from the contaminated space to the uncontaminated spaces in the building. The primary objective we have in doing COVID isolation is to make sure that other people in the house don't get sick. And I like to think of it as dosage. So what we're wanting to do is we don't want to give them any dose, zero dose. And if we can't do that, then we want to give them the littlest dose as possible. So let's talk about how we do that. So the no-dose method means that we are going to remove the aerosols and droplets as fast as we can. And how are we going to do that? Well, Number one, you've heard it before, it's the mask. So the mask is going to stop and catch and filter and trap droplets and aerosols of COVID-19. So that's our primary defense all the time. But when we have someone that's sick, and I'm imagining someone that's got a heavy amount of symptoms with lots of coughing, I would expect a lot of times that the mask isn't worn well or the mask is not worn at all. And so you can see that we could probably have much more contaminated air in that situation, particularly if the person turned out to be a super spreader type. So that's our first method of removal. The second thing that we want to do is exhaust it out as quickly as possible, and I'm going to show you how to use window fans to do that. We can use, this is a $20 20-inch box fan. To go up to a hospital quality standard, we could put a MERV 13 filter and tape that on there and run the air out with that. Both of these fans are going to, well, it's the same fan. This fan will move the most air. This one will move less because it has the resistance of the filter on it. And as we get into the deeper winter and the colder places, the more airflow, the more difficult it is to condition the space. So we could also use something like this, which is a double fan setup, $40, $60 on Amazon. 2 fans, 3 different speeds. We can get this fan to operate very slowly, and I'll show that setup in a little bit. That's number 1 and number 2, and the elimination. And number 3 is a room air cleaner, HEPA quality. Catch it while it's still in the room, and catch it on the filters so it's removed from the breathing space. So primary is mask, direct exhaust, and room air cleaners. Those are all very important. Okay, I've got my window fan set up, and this is the installation that I particularly like, where I've tightened up around the opening with some blue tape, and I've stuffed the crack between the operable sashes because there's an air leak up there. The reason I like this is because there's very little spill of any air that can come back in and make the person here uncomfortable. This is really my recommended setup the colder your climate is. So let's see how this one works. The fans are set both at low speed. And as you'd expect, all your flow is out the window. So right now, as this is happening, more air is coming to make this air up, because of our rule, 1 cubic foot out means 1 cubic foot in is coming from the rest of the house. So now I know I have the direction of airflow that I want, which is coming from the main house, through the hall, through the doorway, and out the window. And no air is going the other way. So that's what's really good about this system. Primary removal system catches anything that the mask might miss. Room air cleaner, it only gets to what it actually sees, so depending on the placement of the room, but this is your optimum system. I'm going to go into another video here where I'll give a lot more instructions on how to do this and how to manage comfort, and also when we're doing this and exhausting air, do we have problems with outdoor allergens coming in? We'll solve all of those problems later. But now I'll talk about the secondary. Let me turn this off. Stop this bubble. So there are 2 other removal systems which I count in a secondary category, and those are the ones we keep up at the air handling unit, at the furnace or the heat pump. And those would be a whole house filtration method and UV lights. And the reason I call them secondary systems is that the contaminated air, for those to work, contaminated air has got to go from here all the way back to the system, and before it even gets seen. But I'm not looking at those as a defense system or my primary defense, and I certainly know there's advertising claims out there saying UV lights will solve all these problems. You'll certainly have a dose before you get there, and I'm going to stay with that and say that I consider those secondary systems, they're inferior to direct window exhaust, mask, and room air cleaner. Remove the dose is number 1. But to give us extra security, we also want to dilute the dose whenever possible. And how do we do that? Well, in the isolation bedroom, air circulation within the room using the ceiling fan, or just a window fan would do well. This will work much better in the summertime probably than in the wintertime, because summertime we enjoy the wind chill effect on us, and the wintertime it will just make us feel colder in a room that we may be having challenges to keep it warm enough. The other good air circulation device within the room is we're already using it for removal, which is the room air conditioner, which is fan driven. So both of those are excellent within the room to use whenever possible. The other good air circulation device for the whole house is our furnace and heat pump that are distributing air through all of the house. And that's not important so much here because we're going to be taping off the supply air registers and the return air registers. But elsewhere in the house, anything that got out there, by the time it got to the return, it would then go up all the way through the furnace and AC unit, and then back out all of the supplies, and then it would be going to the whole house. So it would be a very diluted strength, contaminated air level by the time all that happens. So primary, get rid of it. Don't have a dose. Secondary, dilute it to keep the dose as low as possible. Well, I have one more issue that I want to talk to you about in this video as we're talking about concepts. There's going to be lots of other information in other videos on practical solutions to maintaining comfort, dealing with outdoor allergens with a window exhaust system, as well as how can I let people into my house for a short period of time or a worker for a longer period of time. And then as well, we're going to look at going out and being, so how safe is it to be in an office building or a grocery store, or even get on an airplane. And this last item here is not with airflow, but it is with the thing that shapes airflow within buildings, and that's the shape of the space. So this is again my house and my hallway, and I find this to be a particularly problematic architectural shape for COVID transmission if we've got directional airflow. So it's long and it comes down. You can see it. Hi, how are you doing? And what happens here is, in my particular cases, you know, those supply air registers are discharging and the air comes into the hall, and then it travels down, and then right above me is that return. The rest of the house has got much larger room spaces coming in. It's got the living room, dining room, kitchen area, and the living room area as two big areas. But everything comes back to this spot. And air that comes back this direction is problematic. And this goes beyond, if we know we have COVID isolation, maybe we have someone that has COVID symptoms and is exhaling aerosols and droplets, but we don't know it yet. So the main thing here is that when we get into shapes, architectural shapes that get narrow and short, we tend to then funnel the airflow down those to the point that we get a very uniform and consistent airflow, and that can take a dose like from our isolation bedroom, which was filling the whole room, however much we had not been able to remove the dose by elimination or circulation, not circulation, just elimination. And now that comes here, but now it's focused and it's directional and it's not bouncing around. And so in this situation, I'll show you, this is more problematic to walk up it if the airflow is coming this way than to walk down it. So what I am doing is, if there's any potential contamination up at that end of the hallway, I'm at the downwind side of it, as some people talk about. I'm downstream of it, and you don't want to be downstream of these flows, and particularly as the space gets narrow and shorter, and it becomes more like a duct space where the air is going to be traveling very regularly through it. This is a much more problematic airflow situation because of these architectural characteristics than the air that's coming from the rest of my house, which is wide open. And so we're going to look at that a lot, particularly when we start looking at commercial buildings. Is it's like, where do we have the problems, and the big key is that we want to avoid being under returns. That's the kicker for that one, and we'll be covering that quite a bit on different building types. And I think that brings us to the end of this one. It's a little longer than I thought it was going to be. If you like this video, certainly give it a like. I think that's how you get these things around these days. Subscribe, but I think the important thing is just to share this. I haven't found anything out here that's as detailed, and I'm trying to make this as layperson friendly as possible. I didn't succeed at that as much as I would like, but I'm trying, and I might redo it in a simplified format to keep it maybe to 5 minutes, but I don't know whether I can do that or not. Anyways, thanks all, and good night.